Well, good morning to you all. I'm going to ask you to take out your Bible if you have it and turn to 1 Kings chapter 18. 1 Kings chapter 18. While you're turning there, just let me say thank you so much for being with us. It's so encouraging to see you here, to be with you, and to worship and serve God together. Happy Mother's Day to you all. And I hope that you guys are doing whatever you can to honor those who gave you life and nurtured you as you were raised. But ultimately, let us also remember that today is the Lord's Day. And just as on Mother's Day we seek to honor our mothers, every Lord's Day we seek to honor our God. In the book of 1 Kings, we are introduced to one of my favorite characters in the Bible, one of the most interesting and greatest characters in the entire Bible. He was a man of faith, a man of miracles. He was a man with a remarkable spirit, and his name was Elijah the Tishbite. Elijah is known for many things that you might remember him for. He did all sorts of wonderful things, but probably he's most well known for what happens right here in 1 Kings chapter 18. In 1 Kings chapter 18, we've come to a point in Israelite history where things are exceedingly dark and very terrible. Elijah is a prophet in a time when things are really bad in Israel. The people have been led astray from the worship of Jehovah, or at least the only worshiping Jehovah, and now they're worshiping the Baals and the Asherah because of King Ahab, and mainly his wife, Queen Jezebel. And so in 1 Kings chapter 18, after this nation has been led astray by their terrible leaders, Elijah confronts Ahab, and he proposes on Mount Carmel a contest between the gods. You're serving Jehovah, you're serving Baal. You can't decide how long are you going to go limping between two opinions, right? Choose who's God. Find out which God is real, and let's serve him. And so Elijah proposes the contest, one that you probably know about, right? They all go up on Mount Carmel. And the prophets of Baal, they're given their opportunity to call on their God. They build their altar, they kill their animal, and then whichever God answers by fire from heaven, he is God. And so they call out all day long and do all the things they know to do to get Baal to answer them by fire, and nothing is heard. And then Elijah steps up, and it is his turn. And we see this in verse 36. 1 Kings 18, verse 36. At the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, today let it be known that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their heart back again. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces, and they said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. It's a wonderful, wonderful story, what happens here in 1 Kings chapter 18, which conclusively proves that Baal is no God at all, and that Jehovah is God alone. But you probably know this as well, that at the conclusion of that story, things don't really happen the way you would think that they should happen. After Elijah has won the hearts of the people, at least he thinks he's won the hearts of the people, and he has conclusively proved that Jehovah is God, what should happen? Everybody should turn around. Everybody should be convinced. Fire fell from heaven. Why aren't we convinced? There should be some kind of fantastic revival, this rekindling of this marriage between God and Israel. But if you know the story, you know that's not at all what happens next. It's not what you would expect at all. So go with me to 1 Kings chapter 19. After all of this happens, this wonderful miracle where fire fell from heaven, what happens next is kind of anticlimactic for Elijah. 1 Kings 19:1, now Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me, and even more, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. And he was afraid and arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die. And he said, "It is enough now, O Lord. Take my life, for I am not better than my fathers." The revival that Elijah probably expected never came. Instead, what happens, the people eventually, they go back to idolatry, and Elijah must continue running for his life, which he's been doing since all the way back in chapter 17. And so it's not hard to understand, is it? Why Elijah would have the attitude he has in chapter 19 under that juniper tree. It's enough. I've done all I can do. Take my life because what good can I do if after all of this I can't turn the people's hearts back to you, God? In 1 Kings 19, Elijah is disappointed. He is discouraged. He trusted God. He did everything that God told him to do. He proved that Jehovah is the one God. And after that, nothing really changed. He just feels like a failure. He feels like he can't make a difference. He feels tired and weary, and he just wants to give up. And to be honest, brothers and sisters, that feeling of discouragement is not foreign to us, is it? We too know what discouragement feels like. We too have our juniper tree moments, don't we? When someone we really love, someone we really respect lets us down and they walk away from the Lord, they leave the faith, that creates discouragement. When my marriage, which is supposed to be godly and spiritual, we're supposed to be helping each other get better, when that's not quite working and we're fighting, that's discouraging. When we suffer persecution for the faith that we profess, that's discouraging. When we see sin and ungodliness increase more and more and more in our land, we look at that and we think, what difference can I make? It's discouraging. When God's people don't live the way they ought to live, whether they are not as pure as they ought to be, they are not as holy as they ought to be, they are not as spiritually minded as they ought to be, they don't have the faith that I think they should have, that's discouraging. We understand how Elijah feels. Because in those moments where we have moments like he did, the same thoughts go through our head that went through his head. I'm a failure. I've done all that I can do. I'm so lost right now. Nothing will ever get better. I just want to quit. Anybody ever had those thoughts before? Anybody ever had those thoughts in the past 14 months? Surely. And so what I want you to see this morning, I want you to see what God says to Elijah when he comes to a moment like this. When he's ready to give up, when he is discouraged and disappointed, what does God tell his prophet? Listen to what he says. 1 Kings 19, verse 5. He lay down and slept under a juniper tree, and behold, there was an angel touching him. And he said to him, "Arise, eat." Then he looked, and behold, there was at his head a bread cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you." So he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. Then he came to a cave and lodged there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. And he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" I want you to see this, brothers and sisters, that when Elijah wants to give up, when he just wants to give up and let everything go, God's message to him is, get up, right? You see that. It's kind of funny in that verse, right? He gets to the juniper tree and he lays down and he goes to sleep. And then in verse 5, an angel touches him and awakes him and says, "Arise, eat." And so he eats, and then what's he do again? He goes back to sleep. And then the angel touches him a second time. "Get up." And so he goes to Mount Horeb. You know what he does when he gets to Mount Horeb, which is Mount Sinai? He goes into the cave, right? Again and again and again, Elijah is trying to quit. He's trying to lay down and give up. And again and again and again, God says to him, "Elijah, get up. Arise." In verse 9, the question to Elijah is, what are you doing here? And the implication of that is, you have work to do. You don't need to be here at Mount Sinai all by yourself, away from everybody. You're my prophet. There's stuff for you to do. Get up. What are you doing here? Don't quit on me. That's what God's message is to the prophet when he's discouraged. Get up. But I do want you to appreciate that God doesn't just bark those orders at Elijah like some kind of drill sergeant. Instead, what God does in this moment in 1 Kings 19 is he reminds Elijah of three very important truths. He reminds him of three truths that will fill him with courage when he is discouraged. Three truths that will fill him with courage when he is discouraged. And what I want to do very quickly this morning with you is I want to show you the things that God told Elijah. I want to give you three truths that should fill you with courage when you are discouraged. Because, brothers and sisters, we have to understand as Christians, you may not be there today. You may be like, this is great, all right? Somebody just graduated, or I just graduated. I'm getting on to this new section of my life. This is great. You may be in a great place today. But eventually, every single one of us is going to have a juniper tree moment where we're ready to quit and we're ready to give up. And you need to know what God says. You need to know why you can get up and keep doing God's work even in those moments of discouragement. So 3 truths to fill you with courage when you're discouraged. I want you to notice this first of all, that God tells Elijah when he is discouraged, God says, get up, and you can get up and do my work because I'm still God. Right, we mentioned that in 1 Kings chapter 19, Elijah feels defeated. He feels like he is on the losing team. Like he and God, they worked together and they just didn't make it happen the way it was supposed to happen. You can hear that in his voice. Look with me in verse 10, 1 Kings 19 and verse 10. He said, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away. You hear what he's saying? I've done everything I can do. I've done everything you told me to do. And here we are. We still lost. Elijah feels completely defeated. We tried everything, God. But you know what? It just didn't work. And I wonder sometimes if we have those moments where we feel defeated too. Do you ever have conversations in your house that sound like Elijah, that sound like verse 10? You know, I've been out there, I've been excited about spreading the gospel and teaching someone the good news, but you know what? No one's listening. Everybody just shuts me down. No one wants to have a Bible study. No one wants to come to worship. I just don't know what to do. I've done everything I can do. Or, you know, I'm abounding in good works. I'm trying to do all these good things and trying to let my light shine so that somebody can be brought to the Lord. And you know what? No one's paying attention. It's just not working. Or maybe I'm doing everything I can to keep my family pure and to keep us holy and to keep ourselves blameless and unspotted from the world. But you know what? I see the world and what my family's doing doesn't make any difference. Everything just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. What are we doing? We can't even make a dent. Like Elijah, we can feel defeated too. We have those moments where it seems like the world has won and we have lost. And when Elijah feels that way, and when he says that to God, God answers in an unforgettable way. Verse 11. So he said, go forth and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord was passing by. And a great and strong wind was rending the mountains and breaking in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of a gentle blowing. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. And behold, a voice came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And so when Elijah comes to that moment where he feels like the world has won and he and God have lost, God answers by showing him his incredible power. God says, go forth, and you need to look because the Lord's passing by. And then he sees that terrifying whirlwind. Then he sees that terrible earthquake. And then the fire comes, and the Lord is passing by. The Lord is showing his tremendous power. And this also reminds us, this kind of harkens back to what happens to Moses, I think. Could be wrong about that. But it reminds me of what happens to Moses when Moses is on the exact same mountain and Moses feels exactly the same way. Back in the book of Exodus, after the Israelites sin by making the golden calf, Moses goes back up on the mountain, and God is furious with the people. And God says, you know what, Moses, you go up without me. And Moses says, no, God, I'm not going anywhere without you. And in this moment, he's extremely discouraged. He's extremely disappointed. He's not sure what's going to happen. And so he asked if he can see the glory of the Lord. And God hides him in the cleft of the rock, and his glory passes by. And I wonder if this moment in 1 Kings 19 is supposed to hearken back to that, where Elijah is held in the cleft of a rock in a cave, while the glory of God passes by, to remind him who God is, to remind him that God is still God, no matter what men do. When we feel defeated, we need to remember that God is still God. He is still tremendously powerful. He is still more powerful and more wise than anybody on the earth. He can still do everything he intends to do, and men cannot upset his plans. There's a great psalm about that I'd like to read for you this morning. Psalm 2. Will you turn there for a second? Psalm 2. A great psalm that we need to remember when we feel like sometimes the world is winning and God is losing. It's a psalm of victory, a psalm of encouragement for anybody who has ever felt discouraged in any way. Psalm chapter 2, where the writer says, "Why are the nations in an uproar, and the peoples devising a vain thing? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us tear their fetters apart and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. He will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury, saying, but as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. I will surely tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them like earthenware. Now therefore, O kings, show discernment. Take warning, O judges of the earth. Worship the Lord with reverence and rejoice with trembling. Do homage to the Son, that he will not become angry and you perish in the way, for his wrath may soon be kindled. How blessed are all who take refuge in him." You may remember that in the book of Acts, when the church is first facing persecution for standing up with Jesus, that's the psalm they quote. Why do the peoples rage and the Gentiles plot a vain thing? Because the church in the first century understood what Elijah needed to know here and what we need to remember when we're discouraged. No matter what men do, no matter what men plot, no matter what kings decide, no matter what nations try to do, God is still God. I need to remember that when I'm discouraged, and that will fill me with courage. Notice this, second of all, that when Elijah is discouraged, God tells Elijah, you need to get up and keep doing my work, because my plan is still in place. You know, it seems to me that Elijah had it in his mind exactly the way that everything was supposed to work out. He knew exactly the way that God had planned everything out and the way things were supposed to work out. You know, back in 1 Kings 17, he predicted the drought and King Ahab got mad at him, so he had to run for his life, and he spent time on the lam running away from the king, right? But now in 1 Kings 18, when all this contest happens and God is conclusively proven to be God, then everything should change. No more running for my life. No more having a nation of people that are entrenched in idolatry. Now things are going to be different because God threw fire down from heaven. And it seems to me that part of his discouragement is the fact that things don't go that way at all. God was supposed to win Israel's hearts back in one big terrifying display of power, but that's not what happens. Things don't work out the way he expects. And that's why he's disappointed. That's why he's discouraged. And many people think that the point of what's happening here on the mountain is that God is helping Elijah see that even when things don't work out the way that you think they're supposed to work out, that doesn't mean God is not working his plan. Even though things didn't work out the way Elijah wanted them to, God still had his plan in place. And that's the reason for the way things happen, right? In 1 Kings 19, God tells Elijah to go at the entrance of the cave when all those powerful things happen, when the whirlwind comes, when the earthquake comes, when the fire comes, right? He wants him to see that, see the power of God. But it says God's not in those things. But where is God? He's in the still, small voice that comes afterward. And what's the point of that? Well, maybe the point of that is that sometimes God accomplishes his work in big, powerful ways, like parting the Red Sea. But he doesn't always accomplish his work that way. Sometimes God's plan is to work in small, in subtle ways that maybe we don't expect, that some people don't even realize. It certainly seems like that's the case. Like that's what God's plan eventually is going to be. Because in 1 Kings, if you look further into verse 15 through 17, God tells Elijah what his plan is. And it is not to win back the nation in one big moment. His plan is to accomplish his purpose through a series of men. 1 Kings 19:15, the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you have arrived, you shall anoint Hazael king over Aram, and Jehu the son of Nimshi you shall anoint king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah you shall anoint as prophet in your place. It shall come about, the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall put to death." God's plan wasn't quite what Elijah expected, but that didn't mean God didn't have a plan. He certainly did. It may not have been how Elijah drew it up, but the plan was still in place. And when we feel discouraged, we need to remember the same thing, that God's plan is still in place. Brothers and sisters, I want you to hear me carefully when I say this, because sometimes we forget this. Whatever has happened to you has not surprised God. Whatever you're going through is not greater than God. And whatever has discouraged you can be overcome through God. Can I say that again? Whatever has happened to you has not surprised God. Whatever you're going through is not greater than God. And whatever has discouraged you can be overcome through God. His plan is still in place in your life, no matter where you're at. And that plan, just like it was for Elijah, that plan may look different than you think it should. That plan may not be what you expect. It may not be as obvious as you would like. It may not be as big as you think it should be, but the plan is in place. Even when he doesn't do it the way we expect. You know, I was thinking about that this week, considering how that's true in the story of Jesus, isn't it? That sometimes his plan, his will is not accomplished in the big, huge moments. Sometimes it's accomplished in the very small things. You know, all the people who were waiting for the Messiah, they were expecting a military leader, right? They were expecting somebody to come to the earth and overthrow the Romans and take care of business and bring the nation back. That's not at all who Jesus was. God's plan when it came to saving man, it was not accomplished through military force, through one big, huge, noticeable moment. God's plan was accomplished in the scheme of history, a small and subtle way. It was accomplished when a Galilean carpenter hung on a cross and whispered, "It is finished." Remember that when you're discouraged. Remember that despite what has happened, despite what you expect, God's plan is still in place. And that should fill you with courage when you are discouraged. Enough courage to get up and continue doing what God has for you to do. And finally, consider this, that God tells Elijah, you need to get up. You need to get up because I still have others who are like you. Get up, and you can get up because you're not alone. Oftentimes, brothers and sisters, Well, there's more than one sister. Brothers and sisters, discouragement and loneliness, they go hand in hand. You know that's true. Discouragement and loneliness, they go hand in hand. We feel like when we're discouraged, we feel like we're alone. And that's where Elijah is. Go back to 1 Kings 19 and verse 10, right? What does he say? I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And what? I alone am left. I'm all by myself. There's no one else here. No one else like me. No one else understands. No one else here to help me. I'm all by myself. I'm all alone. But when you read the story, actually, you see that Elijah's totally wrong about that. It's so far from the truth. Things aren't nearly as bad as Elijah has made them out to be. Actually, we know from this story, if you go back to 1 Kings 18, he is not nearly the only prophet of God left. Look in 1 Kings 18 and verse 3. I want you to see this. Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, for when Jezebel destroyed the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave and provided them with bread and water. He's not the only prophet left. Here's one guy, one story, saved 100 prophets. He's not alone. Consider what it says in 1 Kings 19, verse 18, something else that God says to Elijah. After he tells him what his plan is, he says, yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. He's not alone. Things aren't nearly as bad as he's made them out to be. And so when Elijah is discouraged, God tells him, get up. Get up because things are not as bad as they seem. Get up because God still has others who are like you. Brothers and sisters, we need to remember the same thing, because when we're discouraged, we tell ourselves the same lie that Elijah told himself. We tell ourselves that we're all alone and that there's nobody like us, nobody understands us. And that's just not true at all. In fact, what we do sometimes is we make choices that are detrimental. We make choices where we choose to withdraw and seclude ourselves to keep ourselves from the people who are like us and who could encourage us. That's what Elijah does. Do you remember what he did? In 1 Kings 9 and verse 3, it says that when he was afraid, he arose, he ran for his life, he came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He had somebody, he had a right-hand guy there who could encourage him and be with him and help him know that he wasn't alone. And what did he do? He left him and went out in the wilderness by himself. You ever done that? When you're discouraged because you're kind of feeling sorry for yourself, you withdraw from other people. You leave the people who could help you and go hide in a cave. We're all tempted when we're discouraged to think that we're alone. We all have moments where we think these things. No one knows my pain. No one understands my fears. No one has my doubts. No one understands me. No one knows me. No one cares about spiritual things like I do. Ever had those thoughts? And yet, just as it was not true in Elijah's day, it's not true in your day either. It's not true in your life either. It's not true in your family, and it's not true in your church. God has others like you. God has those who do know your pain. There are those who understand your fears and understand your doubts. There are those who understand you. There are those who know you. And there are still those who are devoted to him like you are. God still has other people like you. And that ought to fill us with courage when we are discouraged. As we said at the top, every Christian at some point is going to get discouraged. That's not abnormal. That's normal. That's why the Bible has so much to say about being diligent and about not losing heart and continuing on and having endurance because discouragement happens. And when that happens, God's message to us is get up. Don't be the kind of person that lays down and quits. Don't be the kind of person that stops doing what you're doing because you're discouraged. His message to you is get up. What are you doing here? Go out and do my will. And he says you can do that. You can be filled with courage to get up and continue the work of the Lord because God is still God and you need to believe in his power. His plan is still in place. You need to trust in his wisdom and his providence. And he still has others like you, people that you can lean on, people that you can encourage, and people that can encourage you. And so, brothers and sisters, if you are discouraged this morning, God's message to you is get up. And maybe you're not discouraged, but one day soon you will be discouraged by something. God's message to you is get up. I'm still God. My plan is still in place. I still have others like you. And ultimately, what we need to remember what we're fighting for. We need to remember the reason we get up and continue to do the work of the Lord is because we have a promised inheritance that is fantastic, beyond what we could ask, beyond what we could think, beyond what we can describe with human words. And that's what we're fighting for. Now, it may be possible that someone is here this morning and they're lost. It may be possible that you're here this morning and you do not have the hope of heaven because you've not done what's necessary to have your sins washed away, to become a child of God. And we got to tell you this morning that you can fix that, and you need to fix that as soon as possible. The Bible teaches us that if we believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God, and we're willing to repent of the sins that we've committed that caused him to go to the cross, and we're willing to confess his name, confess our faith in him, then we can be baptized in water for the remission of our sins, can rise to walk in newness of life, become children of his, have a hope of heaven when we die. If you need to do that and have not done that, don't delay. Do that right now while we stand and while we sing.